Today, I want to talk about Karen Blixen, one of the most famous Danish authors, or to be more accurate, I want to talk about this book that I just finished reading. The book is Seven Gothic Tales, written by Karen Blixen, or in a pen name Isak Dinesen. And I chose this book because I think it has very important lessons for most of my listeners who are aspiring authors, especially multilingual aspiring authors who don't have English as their mother tongue. And the lessons that we're going to exert from this book have to do both with the way Karen Blixen used language, the English language, even though she was born and raised in Denmark, and with the way she built the plot of the stories, the 7 short stories that appear in the book. As I will try to convince my listeners, I think that she managed to reach very admirable heights of artistic creation here, but most of her choices go against the recommendations that I recommend for most writers in most cases. My name is Shai Dotan. I am Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English and your research skills. Before I delve into this book, the Seven Gothic Tales, let's speak a little bit about the life of Karen Blixen. So Karen Blixen was born in Denmark, and she decided to marry her cousin, and they both were feeling a little bit as outsiders in the society of Denmark at the time. They decided to go to Africa and build a coffee farm there. This story is beautifully described in the very successful movie with Mary Streep and Robert Redford, Out of Africa. And you can basically follow all the basic details of Karen Blixen's life through this beautiful movie, which is also rich with short epic tales and quotes from poetry. So it's something that I really recommend to watch for anybody interested in improving the English. And she's there in the farm, and at a certain point she realizes that she's getting a bit bored. She eventually left her husband, who was a horrible womanizer, and also lost a lot of her money, and finds a charming man, which of course is depicted in the movie by Robert Redford, who unfortunately dies in an accident. And she mourns him, and that's one of the most touching things that you can find in the movie, and that's based on a true story. So she's left there in the farm. She doesn't have so much to do, and she says, let's try something new at the age of around 45 or something like this. She says, let's write a book. And how do we make the book profitable? Then, like now, her mother tongue, Danish, is limited to a very small audience. So she decides to write a book in English. And she writes a book in English. She tries to sell it to the US. It's a bit difficult to find a publisher, but once she finds a publisher, the Seven Gothic Tales becomes a huge success. And then she starts to get also interest in Denmark. She returned to Denmark in the middle of writing the book. So she started in Africa, and then she returned to Denmark around the time she was 46, and she finished the book there. So she's looking for a translator from English, but she finds nobody that would match her requirements. So she decides to write the book herself in Danish, and she makes it kind of not just a translation, but an adaptation. Now, why do I find this so fascinating? because to a large extent, this is what I and almost all successful academics worldwide do. So when I was writing my dissertation in English in Israel, this was a choice that required many, many years of effort and sacrifice and difficulties and guidance that I received. But I did that because I knew that the audience that I would get in English is much, much larger. And if I want to make an impact in the world of academia, which is global, I have to do that. So it's a choice that is not unique to me. I mean, I think if anybody would come to me now and ask me to supervise them in Danish, even though I'm able to do that, but I would say, assuming even that my Danish would be perfect, I would definitely recommend them not to do so. Write a dissertation in English. Write your first book in English. Afterwards, once you get established as much as you desire, then you can do whatever you want. And actually, Karen Blixen had a success already with her first book. Afterwards, she used to publish the books either first in Danish and then in English, or simultaneously in Danish and English. That's perfectly fine. But she showed the world that she can write a book at a world level that would have a huge impact on the world of literature in English. And that's something that is very, very wise. Just imagine what would happen if she would not do that. If she would write a book in Danish, uh, the only way for it to succeed abroad is if the book would be a huge hit in Danish, and then it would be translated by an expert translator to English, and then another miracle would happen. And these things do happen, okay? And some authors are also diligent enough and calculate enough to write many books and find good translators, and sometimes they succeed. But I think if she would have done that, if in Africa she would have made the decision, let's write in my mother tongue, which is easier, then probably we would never have heard about her today. So that's, I think, is a very useful choice to see how she would, she made this leap and decided to take this huge challenge and succeeded against all odds and became, as we say in Denmark, world famous, at least in Denmark. So everybody in Denmark knows Karen Blixen, and we all know that she has a world reputation. If you look out of Denmark, I think the chances that people would know about her are small, besides the elite circles of literature, where she's held, I think, in quite a high regard. So what do I have to say about her English? So I would tell you that the English that she uses reminds me very much of English I use in my children. And I hope I don't give you the wrong impression, because with my own children, who are now 5 and 7, I use the richest language that I can. My rule is very, very simple. If I can find a word that is rare, and there's a chance that they still never heard it before in their life, and I can squeeze it into a sentence, I would always do it 100%. Even if the word is a bit of a mismatch, even if it's wrong because if it's a wrong register, so it sounds funny, even if I'm not sure if a word means exactly what I want it to mean, I would still do that, which is a choice that I think many people would look at as pretty risky. Why? Because many times people that are not very intelligent speak with a very large vocabulary, and they don't know the meaning of the words that they use, and that's something that can be very annoying. But my goal here is to expose my kids to as many words as I can, continuously, in every conversation. Simple, complicated, emotional, or daily. I use this trick all the time, and I see that it works. So they both develop a very, very high vocabulary, but more importantly than the number of words that they know, they feel comfortable thinking creatively and imaginatively. So I think the same thing is true about Karen Blixen. She's using a very large vocabulary. I sometimes use a dictionary when I read her book, which I don't do usually, and I had to use it quite a few times. So it's words, it's terms, it's quotations from German and French. I mean, I know German and French, and also I think a little bit from Danish, which I also know, but I was not always 100% sure what she meant. Quotations from other literature, references to mythology, to all kinds of things that are really, really difficult to process. But I think this was her goal. Her goal was not that I would pick up a page and I would just read through it beginning to end, understand exactly where she's going without any problem, and just continue forward. Like, this is not a Malcolm Gladwell book where you kind of run through a page in 30 seconds or less, and you never find anything stopping you. She wants you to stop and to stumble and to find a lot of things that are difficult along the way. And I think, I don't know if she was asked about it, but I think she probably did not expect the readers to actually check every single one of these things thoroughly. Today, with Google and with ChatGPT, you can do that with quite a lot of effort. I mean, this book took me a long time to read, and I didn't check a lot of things. Yeah, but you're able to do that. In her time, you would just not be able to do that. So, I mean, at least with a reasonable amount of effort. So what is left is islands of mystery. So things that you are not sure exactly what they mean, and you have to use your imagination to try to understand what were they supposed to mean. And this, I think, is something that is very, very charming, and I enjoy that. And I think that um, it's also especially charming to feel this way in English, because when I read a language that I don't know that well, what I'm just studying, then I get the sensation all the time, and not always in a positive way. It's not always an easy thing. But when one is reading English and has been reading English for so many decades, this feeling of wonder and of mystery is just disappears. And this book kind of helped me to regain that, because I was really able to find myself stumble again, thinking, do I know this word? Do I know what it means? Does it mean what I think that Karen Blixen thinks it means? And if not, why? So that's something that is very, very unique. Writing with a very large vocabulary. What I want to stress is, even though I told you that's the way I teach my children, that's not the way I write papers, that's also not the way I teach. When I write papers or books, my rule is very, very simple. If I can write it simpler, I will write it simpler. I would never add a layer of complication unless I have to. Sometimes you don't have any choice because the argument requires it. But if you can write it in a simpler way, you always should do that. Apparently, that's not true for all forms of literature. And I think the book is a really great example of how you can reach a different goal when you do away with this rule and you move on to the complete opposite of that. Besides the fact that the language of the stories is very, very complicated, the other layer of difficulty, of complication, has to do with the plot of the stories. The plot is very, very, very hard to follow. It sometimes starts a story and then describes a person that looks at first unimportant, but then this person relates another story that becomes the most important thing for another 20 pages, until you start another story or you go back to the original story without any warning. That's something that is very, very hard to follow. When I teach students how to write, for example, as I describe in my book that always appears at the end of these videos, I tell them, when you write a research work, you have to follow what I called the Christmas tree structure. Now, if you think about the Christmas tree, it has a very, very large and very straight trunk, and out of this come branches that are also, very symmetrical in form. And these branches are also divided into branches that are symmetrical, and you can never mistake a branch for the trunk, or you can never mistake a side twig for a main branch. If you write in this way, you are helping your reader very, very significantly, because you're helping the reader see where the plot is going all the way. Of course, if you write in nonfiction, let's say you write an assignment like a thesis in law or a book or a paper in law, like what I usually write, it's very important to guide your reader so they can understand what is important, what is the direction you are going to. Why are you telling me this? What extra information do I need to know to understand you better? And so on and so on. All these questions arise as you go along, and you need to provide the reader with continuous guidance towards this result. Now, Karen Blixen stories are doing exactly the opposite of that. So the stories are never organized in a clear way. It's always very, very difficult to follow them over a particular plot. Now, there are works of literature that are very, very complicated and rich, but still have a very easy plot. So let's say, tell me to summarize Crime and Punishment. The plot is very simple. There's a poor deranged man who kills an old lady, steals the money, and then runs away through regret throughout the story. That's the storyline. Everything goes from there. And then you can add the branch, because he also had a sister that is very, very good. Also falls in love with a prostitute that is very good. There's a police after him. There's another character there. These are all branches that go from it, and then you can add as many details as you want. Okay, it doesn't matter. But the clear plot, right when you read the first pages of a book, you see where things are going. And it's not the case with Karen Blixen stories. You can read some of his short stories are actually quite long novellas. So it takes 70, 80, 90 pages. You read them, and then only once you finish the story, you can start to reflect, okay, what was important here? Who are the main characters? What is going on? I have to confess, sometimes by the time I read a whole story, I forgot where it began. I wasn't really sure what was going on. And that's something that I think is very unique. In a way, it is a literature that is much more true to life. The Danish philosopher whose work I'm sure Karen Blixen knew, and I actually found quite a few examples of cases where his literature, his philosophy appears there. I'm speaking, of course, about Søren Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard used to say that life must, in English, it would be life must be lived forward, but only understood backwards. So you never know where life is going, and that's something that I think is a very useful lesson of Karen Blixen stories. You don't know where your life is going to take you, and that's why I think that the book has a very great artistic value in this respect. It really helps us understand the phenomena of living better. There are different ways to do this in literature. This is not a stream of consciousness story that kind of relates events as they happen almost randomly in life. It's story within story within story, and it shows you that you never know what becomes the important story in life. Okay? You live through the life, you end up in relationships, you get out of relationships. You never know which one is the one that will lead you into happiness or new adventures. It's a mystery, and that's something that I think that the book does very well. I also think that this is a book that is a great antidote for what I view as one of the most difficult problems today, and I say this also about myself, it is lack of a sufficient span of attention. So I have to say, I'm now using YouTube to put my videos. As you can see, they are long and they are usually within the same topic. But I very much enjoy to watch short videos about a lot of different topics that are interesting for me. But I see that over time, this erodes my ability to concentrate with larger projects. And that's something that is very difficult to fight against. I think that people that are reaching childhood or maturity today, they don't even understand the kind of life that I lived through as a child. computer games, no internet, no practically no television in Israel because we didn't have any commercial television until I was in my teens. Uh, and we just had a lot of time to do one specific thing, like sit down, read a book, and that's something that I think is lost. And the book for me is a great exercise in that. So if you are looking for something that you would exercise your brain to guide it back towards this capacity of having a larger, longer span of attention, I think that's a great choice. And I really recommend that exercise to a lot of people. I did it myself consciously because I knew that I really needed this exercise at the time that I did it. Having said all that, I still think that that's a very bad advice for somebody that wants to write, especially nonfiction. So, as you can see in a lot of these videos, I try to project from the genius of authors of fiction to the mundane work of academics like myself. This is not something that you should emulate, absolutely not. You really want to be in a situation where you guide the reader very, very accurately, and the reader knows at every point where they are going and where the argument is going. I want to end by saying a few words about the movie Out of Africa. I recalled that the movie refers to Mary Streep playing Karen Blixen as a Shehrazada. Shehrazada that describes, is described, of course, in Thousand Nights and One Night as the woman that bewitched the king with stories every night, and every night she would finish a story and start a new one, but not finish it. So the king would always want um, to keep her alive for one more day, so he could hear the rest of the story. And this went on and on for 1,000 nights. So I thought that the word Shahzad appears in the movie. ChatGPT seems to think that it doesn't, that it appears in recollections of herself in the book that describes her experience in Africa, which she wrote after she wrote Seven Gothic Tales, and it was after this book was a great success. So an autobiographic book. Why I'm very, very happy to see that I see eye to eye with Karen Blixen here about her role, which is the role of Shahrazada. What does Shahrazada try to do? She's trying to pique the curiosity of the audience in a way that would make them come for more information. So instead of basically satisfying them, giving them answers, if you project it for an academic, you always show that there's more that you can give. There's more ideas that are out there. I don't think that this is a great advice for almost anybody. This is something that is very, very difficult to pull off. To really be in a situation where people are coming back to you because they want an extra piece of a puzzle that you created. If you manage to do that as an author, you can rule the world of academia or literature or whatever part of intellect you are contributing to. But doing so is very, very, very hard. And I struggle to think of many examples of people that have done so successfully. And usually, you want an author that delivers in a way that gives you what you expected, what they seem to promise, what is needed. But an author that manages to show that there's always one more story that is waiting behind, with which they can tempt you to come back. I think this would be a great author indeed, and the use of a very, very rich and intricate language and a very, very complicated plot combined, I think manages to reach this incredible feat of literature. That is all for today. Thank you for watching the video, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe. And I'm also welcome your comments on the video very, very much. And as always, until we meet next time, keep learning.